I have been playing Dark Magician since getting back into Yu-Gi-Oh, and I have seen very good results with the deck that I have optimized and shown to all of you on my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. So with that, welcome back to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. In the last couple of videos on this channel, we got into the actual deck profile itself, we got into some combo hands, and now we're going to be getting into test hands. The difference between the combos and the test hands is that combos were pre-designated cards that we already had, and in this video I want to show off how often this deck can gimmick puppet your opponent, because as I've said in the last couple deck profiles, this is a Dark Magician deck, but is not a pure Dark Magician deck, and the goal in this deck is to give your opponent the gimmick puppet nightmare. With that being said, I'm sure that people familiar with branded combos will notice that there are many other lines that you can go into in most of these hands, but we will be focusing on attempting to give our opponent the gimmick puppet as often as possible. And just to show off how often this deck can do that, I will not be scrapping any bad hands. We're going to be playing through them, we're going to be seeing what we get out of this, and hopefully we can gimmick puppet our opponent every single time. So with that, let's get into the test hands. We now have our deck nice and shuffled, so we're going to go ahead and draw our initial 5 cards because this is a going first deck, so we will be assuming that every scenario is going first and we will draw our initial 5 cards. In this situation, we have Infinite Impermanence, Nadir, Guiding Quem the Virtuous, Magician Souls, and Fusion Deployment. This is a very good hand. We have access to most things. We can get anything off of our Fusion Deployment. We can get our Dark Magician off of our Souls or go for draws, but in this situation, all of these cards are really strong and we don't want to get rid of any of them. And finally, Quem can just set up some fun plays that we will get into in a moment. So in this situation, we will start by first, I guess, putting our extra deck on the side, and then we'll go ahead and activate our Magician Souls going into our deck and sending our Dark Magician to the graveyard for cost. We will send our Dark Magician to the graveyard, give our deck a quick shuffle, and then we will go ahead and at this time send our Magician Souls to the graveyard, special summoning our Dark Magician. We could actually go ahead and summon this in defense position just for the sake of being careful. Next up, we will go ahead and normal summon our Guiding Quem the Virtuous. Our Guiding Quem the Virtuous will then activate, allowing us to send a Fallen of Albaz or a card that mentions it from our deck to our graveyard, and we will go ahead and send a Fallen of Albaz just to make things easier in the process of gimmick puppeting our opponent. We will then go ahead and activate our Fusion Deployment, revealing a Yugioh the Dust Dragon from our extra deck and special summoning a Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous from our deck. Our Fusion Deployment has resolved, so we will now send that to the graveyard, and next up we will go ahead and activate our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, fusing together our Dark Magician and our Blazing Cartesia. We will then summon into a Yugioh the Dust Dragon. In this situation, I think we could still get a standby phase gimmick puppet anyway, so we're going to go a little bit further with this and send some more cards and try to get a better board out of this. So we're going to activate our Yugioh, sending our Garura to the graveyard, and then on resolution, we will be attempting to activate our Garura to draw a card. We'll go ahead and shuffle the deck a little bit more just to randomize this since I didn't give it a very good shuffle first time. Go ahead and cut this randomly, and then we will draw a card. So we drew in a Crossout Designator, which obviously is just a good call all around to stop any hand traps that might try to stop us from making our play. At this point, and even before when we summon the Yugioh, we are able to activate our Guiding Quem the Virtuous to special summon another card. In this situation, I don't know that we'll do that though, because we want our Albaz in the graveyard at the moment, and we also want our Cartesia to go to hand at the end of this turn, so I think we will hold off on that. At this point, we are done special summoning from the extra deck, so we're going to go ahead and activate our Nadir Servant, which will allow us to send a card from the extra deck to the graveyard and then search a card with equal or less attack. At this point, we're going to go ahead and send our Tri-Brigade Arms Bucephalus, which will allow us to, like I said, search out our Dogmatica Maximus, essentially. We will search out our Dogmatica Maximus and add it to our hand, give the deck a quick shuffle, and then we will go ahead and send our Nadir to the graveyard, and then we will activate Tri-Brigade Arm Bucephalus to send another card from the extra deck to the graveyard, specifically a Beast, Wing Beast, something of the sort. In this deck, we send Brigrand or we send Garura. 90% of the time, though, we send Brigrand. At this point, we will now banish our Tri-Brigade Arms Bucephalus from the graveyard to special summon our Dogmatica Maximus. We will now activate Dogmatica Maximus, sending 2 more cards from our extra deck and from our opponent's extra deck to the graveyard, their choice, we will send our Albion and our Lulu-Lilith. We are now done comboing off, so we're going to go ahead and place our Infinite Impermanence and our Crossout Designator as further interruptions for our opponent's turn, and we're going to proceed to our end phase. First, we will be adding our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous back to our hand, and then in sequence, we will be activating our Albion the Branded Dragon, Lulu-Lilith, and Brigran the Glory Dragon to search out of our deck. The order that you do this really depends on what your opponent is playing and if you're worried about them hitting anything, but in this moment, we're just going to go ahead and do all of these now. So one of them that we are going to do is our Albion the Branded Dragon to search our Branded in red and set that to the field. We are then going to use our Brigran to get a Fallen of Albaz and add it to our hand. And finally, we will be getting a Blazing Cartesia and specially summoning it to the field off of Lulu-Lilith going to the graveyard. We now have a pretty strong board, pretty strong back row, and 2 cards in hand still. With that, we will proceed to our opponent's turn. Obviously, this field does lose very hard to something like a Dark Ruler No More or Forbidden Droplet. At times, I have ran Droplet as a target for crossout just on the off chance that a spell is not sent. We still have some lines of play if we get hit with a Dark Ruler, because obviously we still have the Fallen Balbaz and Graveyard, so we do have the Brand in red, which can get us to a Sanctifier and get us a further special summon, depending on how we play things. But in this situation, we're just going to go ahead and hope that we're not getting hit by anything, but also I do want to note that we did have a Dark Magician in the beginning of this play, so we could have possibly waited and done a play where we can get a Dragoon on field. That's always a possibility when you have a Dark Magician and a Cartesia and a Waiter and Albaz, but for this situation, this is how we're playing this. So in this scenario, we would go ahead and wait for our opponent to do anything in their main phase, and then we would chain our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, fusing together our Fallen of Albaz in hand and our Blazing Cartesia on field to make another copy of Yugioh the Dust Dragon. We would then attempt to activate Yugioh the Dust Dragon to send a card from deck or extra deck to the graveyard, and then we would go ahead and chain our Brand in red, adding an Albaz back to hand and immediately fusion summoning our Maximus and our Yugioh with our Albaz. That's kind of just up to choice. I would do the Maximus in this situation, however, since they get banished. We'd go ahead and banish those, summoning out our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. Yugioh would then resolve, sending off our Gimmick Puppet Nightmare from the deck to the graveyard. We can then immediately activate our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon to summon a Gimmick Puppet to the field, obviously letting your opponent's chain resolve with whatever they had. There are a lot of things that we can summon in this moment, and we also have access to summoning out a Fallen of Albaz off of our Guiding Quem the Virtuous. Also a Cartesia, but obviously we've already used Cartesia in this moment, so we will go ahead and target our Albaz to summon, and then we will go ahead and activate Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, targeting our Gimmick Puppet and our Blazing Cartesia or our Dark Magician. I would actually probably go Dark Magician in this moment just to get him back on the field. So we'll target our Dark Magician, giving our opponent the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, resolving our Guiding Quem the Virtuous, and getting our Albaz to the field. If we did have more cards in this scenario, which there are lines in this exact hand that we could have more cards in this scenario, we could also fuse our Albaz with the Gimmick Puppet. We can do that either way, but it's not very strong at this moment because all we would be going into is a Lulu-Lilith, since Brigran is in our graveyard, and our we would be going into Lubellion since Brigran is in our graveyard, and we wouldn't have something else to fuse with our Lubellion. So this is the first test hand scenario. I think it worked out pretty well, and obviously there are many other plays, and every play in this deck, since it is a branded variant, depends on what your opponent is playing, the game state, and what you feel you need to do in that moment. But for this test hand video, like I said, we are focusing on getting the Gimmick Puppet to our opponent's field as consistently as possible. So with that, we will go into the next test hand. We have now shuffled our deck, and we'll be drawing another 5 cards, and we will see if we can't Gimmick Puppet our opponent. So this time we have Nibiru, Magician's Souls, Illusion of Chaos, Souls, and Fallen of Albaz. Not an ideal hand, but it is possible for us to still Gimmick Puppet our opponent, so let's go ahead and see what we can do with this. First off, we will start off by activating our Illusion of Chaos, searching out our copy of Magician's Rod and adding it to our hand. We will then shuffle our deck and place another card on top of the deck. In this situation, we would probably send the Souls since we have multiple copies of it. Next up, we would go ahead and summon our copy of Magician's Rod to search out a copy of Illusion of Chaos. Essentially, what we are doing right now is trying to draw into more engine to make our hand playable. We will now add Soul Servant to our hand and then activate our Magician's Souls, sending either a copy of Dark Magician or Palladium Oracle Mahad for cost. In this situation, I would go ahead and send off the Palladium Oracle Mahad, because if we draw into a branded fusion, that is going to be one of the only hard ways that we can make a Gimmick Puppet in this scenario, because we will need a light spellcaster in our graveyard. And without access to Cartesia at the moment, Mahad is our answer. So we're going to go ahead and send Mahad to the graveyard. Special summoning our Magician Souls in defense position. At this point, we will go ahead and activate Magician Souls, sending off Soul Servant to cost, for cost, essentially to draw a card. That card was Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. So at this point, we still don't have anything that's going to get us further, but hopefully we can banish our Soul Servant and draw into one more card that will matter. So we will now banish off our Soul Servant, drawing into the exact card that we needed. This is why we send off the Palladium Oracle Mahad in this situation, because you might draw into a Branded Fusion, which will get the entire thing going. So at this point, we will go ahead and activate our Branded Fusion, sending off a copy of Fallen Albaz and a copy of Gimmick Puppet Nightmare from our deck to the graveyard. This will let us summon out our Lubellion the Searing Dragon, and we'll go ahead and put him in the extra monster zone. We will then activate our Lubellion the Searing Dragon, discarding one card. In this situation, we'd probably go ahead and discard the Illusion of Chaos, since Ghost Bell and Nibiru are both interruptions on our opponent's turn. And then that will allow us to shuffle in our Fallen of Albaz and our Palladium Oracle Mahad from our graveyard back into our deck to summon into our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. On our summon of Lubellion the Searing Dragon, usually we would probably discard an Illusion of Chaos, but for this sake, we probably want to get our standby phase Gimmick Puppet going out, because there are a lot of cards like Dark Ruler No More that can screw you over pretty bad if you get hit in the main phase, so getting the Gimmick Puppet out in standby phase is just a little bit stronger. So obviously we could discard something like a Ghost Bell, and Fallen of Albaz will be good on next turn, but we're going to go ahead and just hope that our opponent doesn't have something, a quick phase effect that they can stop our card with before we get the Gimmick Puppet out. So we're going to go ahead and discard our Fallen of Albaz, because right now we are going to shuffle cards back into our deck. And if we shuffled back in a Albaz and a Mahad, and we did not discard Albaz at this point, and we discarded Illusion of Chaos instead, we would not be able to summon Illusion of Chaos to our field, essentially getting a standby phase Gimmick Puppet to our opponent's field. So we're going to go ahead and shuffle in these two cards so that we can still do what we want to do. So at this point, we would go ahead and summon into our favorite monster, wherever it is, our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. And at this point, we would go ahead and end our turn, and essentially right after our opponent draws, we would activate Albion the Branded Dragon, attempting to summon an Albaz to our field and giving them a Gimmick Puppet, locking them out of special summoning for the rest of the turn once Gimmick Puppet hits the field. So again, this was a very weak hand at first. We did not have much, but our Dark Magician engine got us exactly into the cards that we needed to lock our opponent out of summoning for the rest of the turn. So even when your hands are not too ideal, you usually still have a way to get a Gimmick Puppet onto your opponent's field, which is very powerful, very strong, and the point of this deck. So with that, we'll go into the next test hand. Our deck is now shuffled, and we will get into the third test hand, and we'll draw our first 5 cards once more. We now have Nibiru, Called by the Grave, Guiding Quem, Blazing Cartesia, and Fallen of Albaz. Again, this isn't the best hand in the world, but we are going to go ahead and see what we can do with it. We're going to start off by summoning our Guiding Quem the Virtuous, which will allow us to send a Fallen of Albaz or something that mentions it from deck to graveyard. So we'll go ahead and use Guiding Quem the Virtuous to send our copy of Fallen of Albaz from our deck to graveyard. We will then special summon our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, since an Albaz is in our graveyard, and we will then use its effect to fuse together our copy of Albaz and Cartesia, sending them to the graveyard and special summoning out our Granganule the Dust Dragon. On resolution, we will go ahead and activate our Guiding Quem the Virtuous, targeting our copy of Blazing Cartesia in the graveyard, and then chain our Granganule to send a card from deck or extra deck to the graveyard. So we will now go ahead and resolve our Granganule, sending our Garura to the graveyard, and then we will summon our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous back to the field. We will then activate our Garura, attempting to draw a card. In this situation, we drew into Illusion of Chaos. Now, obviously, we would usually want the Called by the Grave, but I am just testing to see if I can still get a Gimmick Puppet to the opponent's field, because we are trying to Gimmick Puppet our opponent at all costs right now. So we are going to go ahead and activate our Illusion of Chaos, searching for our Magician Souls. And again, this is not the most optimal play right here. Gimmick Puppeting your opponent is not always the best thing that you can do. Sometimes just building your board with very strong branded cards, or maybe a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, is the move, but right now we are trying to Gimmick Puppet, so we're going to do what we do. So we're going to put our Illusion of Chaos Chaos back on top of the deck, and then activate Magician's Souls, sending our copy of Dark Magician from the deck to the graveyard. And then we will shuffle our deck. We will then go ahead and special summon our copy of Magician's Souls. We will now activate our Magician's Souls, sending our Called by the Grave to the graveyard to draw another card. Obviously, you usually don't want to do this because Called by the Grave is a very good card to have in hand, but again, Gimmick Puppet. So we're going to go ahead and draw into, again, an amazing card. Again, I don't want to say this enough. Not exactly optimal. We don't want to be getting rid of Called by the Grave in most situations, but if you really don't think you can do anything against your opponent unless you Gimmick Puppet them, this is what we're doing. So now we're going to go ahead and activate our Nadir Servant, going into our extra deck to send off our copy of Tri-Brigade Arms Bucephalus to the graveyard to search out a Dogmatica Maximus. So now we have Dogmatica Maximus, Nadir will go to the graveyard, and Tri-Brigade Arms Bucephalus will again send off our Brigran the Glory Dragon. We will then banish our Bucephalus to summon our Dogmatica Maximus. We will now activate Dogmatica Maximus, sending off a Lulu Lilith and an Albion the Branded Dragon. Obviously, we already have access to a Fallen of Albaz in this situation, but these really are the send-offs at this point when you're trying to maximize Nadir, and we already have Grur in the graveyard, so we obviously can't use that again. If we had Duality to shuffle it back in, it would be another situation. At this point, we would go ahead and end our turn, and we would, again, in sequence, whichever order makes the most sense in each scenario, we would activate our Albion the Branded Dragon, our Despian Lulu Lilith, and our Brigran the Glory Dragon, getting us a Brandon Red, a Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, and a Fallen of Albaz. So we now searched out these cards from our deck. We will be adding the Brandon Red face down in our back row. We will be special summoning our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous and adding Fallen of Albaz to our hand and passing turn to our opponent. We will now wait for our opponent to do anything in their main phase, and we will chain our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, fusing together our Magician's Souls and our Blazing Cartesia to make another copy of Granginiol the Dust Dragon. We will then activate Granginiol the Dust Dragon, chaining our Brandon Red, adding a Fallen of Albaz to our hand, and immediately fusion summoning our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon with our Fallen of Albaz and our Dogmatica Maximus. We are now into our Albion Sanctifier Dragon, and Granginiol will resolve and send off our one copy of our Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. We would then go ahead and chain our Albion the Sanctifier, giving opponent our Gimmick Puppet, and giving ourselves either a Dark Magician, an Albaz, or a Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous. In this situation, we actually could go into an Albaz, like I'd mentioned previously, and we can actually activate our Albaz on summon, discarding our other copy of Fallen of Albaz, fusing with the opponent's Gimmick Puppet Nightmare to make a copy of Lubellion the Searing Dragon. You can then use your Lubellion the Searing Dragon to discard your Nibiru the Primal Being, shuffling back in your Dark Magician and your Lubellion to make your copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Obviously, in this situation, we don't have another card in hand, and we might have had ways to get cards in hand. Again, though, I'm just trying to get a Gimmick Puppet to the opponent's field to lock them out for the rest of the turn. So obviously, Dragoon does not have a negate right now, and also all of our Albaz are either banished or in the graveyard. Sometimes it doesn't matter because this is usually enough of a board to make your opponent scoop pretty fast, but on the next turn, we'll draw into another card, obviously not the Dark Magician, because I just tossed that back on top of the deck, but we'll draw into another card. It might be a card that we'll just use for negate fodder or something else, but essentially we got the Gimmick Puppet to our opponent's field, so we did what we came here to do. So far we have successfully been able to gimmick our opponent 3 times in a row off of test hands, and we're going to hope that we could do this a 4th and final time. So with that, we're going to look at our hand, and we can immediately see that we will be Gimmick Puppeting our opponent. We're going to go ahead and activate our Illusion of Chaos to search our copy of Magician's Rod from our deck, adding it to our hand. We have Magician's Rod right here. Give your deck a quick shuffle and go ahead and toss one of your copies of Illusion of Chaos back on top of the deck. We will then activate our Magician's Souls in this situation. In this situation, we're going to go ahead and send our Palladium Oracle Mahad, getting a Light Spellcaster in the graveyard, allowing us to get a Gimmick Puppet Nightmare to our opponent's field off of our Branded Fusion. We will then go ahead and summon our Magician's Souls in defense position, and then we will activate our Magician's Rod, searching a copy of Soul Servant. And this is going to be really great because we're going to be drawn into a lot of cards. At this point, we've shuffled. We're going to go ahead and give our deck a quick cut because our opponent probably would in this situation. And we're going to activate our Magician's Souls, sending 2 copies of Soul Servant from our hand to the graveyard to draw into 2 more cards, which turned out to be pretty incredible. And then we're going to go ahead and banish our Soul Servant, drawing into one more card, which just made this so much better. Now in this situation, since we drew into an Nadir Servant, we're probably going to go ahead and make a Dragoon. And since we have a Cartesia in hand, we're also going to be able to summon this using our Branded Fusion. Fallen of Albaz means that we don't necessarily need to go into Brigrand to get a Fallen of Albaz later off of Nadir, so this is just very good all around. We're going to go ahead and activate our Branded Fusion, sending off our copy of Fallen of Albaz and Dark Magician from our deck to the graveyard. Which in this situation, if you didn't want to go into a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, you could also keep this Dark Magician in the graveyard to get 2 draws off your Soul Servant next turn, so long as Mahad and Dark Magician are still in your graveyard, so very good all around. But right now, we are going to be going into our Lubellion to try to get a negate on the field to make sure that our Gimmick Puppet ends up going through. So we're going to get our Lubellion on the field. We're going to go ahead and activate Lubellion, discarding our Illusion of Chaos and shuffling back in our Dark Magician and our Lubellion the Searing Dragon to make our copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. So now we have Dragoon on field, and we still have Nadir, Cartesia, and Albaz. At this point, since we still have Fallen of Albaz in our graveyard, we're going to summon our copy of Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous. In this situation, we have a few things we can do. We can either try to draw into more cards, which obviously we do have one Secret Village in the main deck, so we could try to draw into a Secret Village, which would just make this combo basically unbreakable. Secret Village plus Dragoon plus a Sanctifier that's going to give your opponent a Gimmick Puppet is pretty much unbreakable for the most part, unless your opponent is just really, really good, and at that point, it's on them. I mean, they're just the better player at that point. There's nothing we can do about it. So we could essentially either fuse together our Cartesia and our Rod to go into a Granguignol, send off a Garura, and get into a draw before we use our Nadir Servant, or we could go into a Mirror Jade at this point and then use our Nadir to get the Gimmick Puppet lock going. And I think we're going to go ahead and do that just because I kind of want to show off how far this deck can go if we're trying to go further with it. So we're going to activate our Blazing Cartesia, fusing together our Fallen of Albaz and our Blazing Cartesia to summon into our copy of Albion the Branded Dragon. Albion the Branded Dragon would then activate its effect, banishing off a copy of Fallen of Albaz and itself to make our copy of Mirror Jade. We will then go ahead and activate our Nadir Servant, this time using it to send off our Garura so that we can get into another draw and hopefully see a Secret Village of the Spellcasters. Nadir will then allow us to go into our deck and search our copy of Dogmatica Maximus. We will then shuffle and cut our deck because we will be drawing right now, and we will be attempting to activate and resolve our Garura to draw another card, and we drew into Nibiru the Primal Being, so it doesn't really get us further, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead and banish our copy of Garura from the graveyard, since its use has already been used. We're going to go ahead and activate our Dogmatica Maximus, sending off our copies of Albion the Branded Dragon and Despian Lulu Lilith from our extra deck to the graveyard. At this point, we have a card in hand, which is a Nibiru, by the way. We have a Mirror Jade on field, we have a Dragoon on field, and now we are going to proceed to our end phase. First, adding our Blazing Cartesia to the hand, since fusions have been in the graveyard, and then we're going to activate our Lulu Lilith and our Albion the Branded Dragon, getting us a Cartesia to the field and a Branded in red also to the field. We will then pass the turn over to our opponent, and again, we will wait for our opponent to do anything in their main phase, and we'll go ahead and chain our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, fusing together our Magician's Rod and our Blazing Cartesia to make a copy of Granguignol the Death Dragon. Granguignol the Death Dragon will then attempt to activate its effect, chaining our Branded in red, going into our graveyard, grabbing us our copy of Fallen of Albaz. Fallen of Albaz will then allow us to immediately fusion summon, and we will do that using our Maximus and our Fallen of Albaz, making our copy of Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. We will then resolve our Granguignol, sending off our copy of Gimmick Puppet Nightmare from the deck to the graveyard. We will then start a new chain with our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, giving our opponent a Gimmick Puppet, and again, taking whatever we want from the graveyard. In this situation, I would either grab a Cartesia or a Mahad, but obviously we have a Cartesia in hand, so I think I would go ahead and summon a Mahad, because if your opponent has a Dark Monster, he can double up his attack. Also, if he does get destroyed by battle or card effect and goes to the graveyard, you can special summon a Dark Magician. I think it's banished right now. It's not banished right now, so you can summon a Dark Magician. We shuffled it in off of Lubellion. So in this scenario, we may or may not have negated yet with Dragoon, but we still have a negate with Dragoon off of this discard. We have a Nibiru in case our opponent somehow summons, but they won't be because we have already given them the Gimmick Puppet. Sanctifier's already had its use, but Granganule is a further interruption. If they do special summon, this is just off of the hypothetical. If they did stop the Gimmick Puppet, we have a Mirror Jade on field, which can wipe the board if it leaves the field. Furthermore, it can also banish things from your opponent's field. You could even banish a Gimmick Puppet if you want, but I would never do that. We love Gimmick Puppet here. Anyway, this was the 4th test hand, and I'm very happy that all 4 test hands ended with a Gimmick Puppet on the opponent's field. This is the purpose of the deck, obviously, as you've seen, and I'm sure if you know the lines really at all, then you probably saw that there are many, many other lines that you can go, many other avenues you can take with this deck, but like I said many, many times during the video, I sound like a broken record, but we are just trying to Gimmick Puppet our opponent, and it worked out very well in this test hand video. I'm very happy with how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it as well. This was my take on the Dark Magician Gimmick Puppet Turbo deck. And again, guys, if we draw into that on any of these, or if you're siding and you have Secret Village to toss on top of this because you know you're going first, this deck is just very powerful. It's very, very powerful, very, very strong. It can make crazy boards, and just depending on the scenario that you're in, I mean, the moon is your limit. The sky is your limit. That's what I was trying to say. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. Thanks for joining me on this journey. This is the end of this 3-part series that I was making with this deck. Obviously, we are expecting a ban list very soon, and it's very possible that Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is going to get hit. Depending on what gets hit, and if Sanctifier does not get hit, we are probably going to be swapping Gimmick Puppet out for something else. Not equally as strong, but still pretty strong in this scenario. If Sanctifier gets hit, then we're going to be working on a deck profile with the Winda package involved instead. Essentially, we'd be swapping out Gimmick Puppet for Schism, and then freeing up 3 extra deck spots, which could be anything like the Psychic End, the Master of Chaos, the Brigrand, maybe a second Granganule, but I feel like the second Granganule will still be pretty necessary in this list. Tri-Brigade Arm Bucephalus. These are all cards that we can swap out. Everything in here is absolutely mandatory. I still feel like some of these are pretty mandatory. I don't know that I will ever take Psychic End Punisher out. I love him in this list. I think being able to summon a Cartesia and then fuse sync it with your Dark Magician to make a Psychic End is crazy. So I don't know that I'll be taking that out, but we will see what happens with the ban list, and we will make changes as needed. But with that, this is the Dark Magician deck profile. We're going to really hope we don't get hit and we don't have to change this profile at all, because I think it's great. I think it's very good as is, and I don't think it needs much change aside from a few hand traps for your, depending on your locals, depending on the format. But with that, thank you so much for following me on this journey, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you.